you takes them for a friend, then surely he is one of them. In other words, he's an apostate. Or, this is another verse, you shall find none who believe in Allah in the last day, in other words, a Muslim, on friendly terms with those who oppose Allah and His Messenger. And oppose doesn't mean like attack them. Oppose means reject Him, not submit to Him. Even if they be their fathers, their sons, their brothers, or their nearest kindred. Another verse, neither the Jews nor the Christians will ever approve of you until you follow their ways. Again, until you apostatize.
Right.
So these verses form the centerpiece of this loyalty and enmity doctrine. And that's the problem. How can you then say, look, this is all al-Qaeda's propaganda?
Well, but all religions have problematic texts. You know, in Christianity, for instance, you know, we're supposed to stone homosexuals, or even,
Old Testament,
kill your disobedient children. And we have chosen to draw a circle around this. Now, Islam has a problem, I think, not so much with the religion as with fundamentalism, which is a problem with a lot of different religions.
But what does that mean, fundamentalism?
Taking selectively certain passages in the sacred text and justifying present-day actions. I would say that's the basis of the problem of fundamentalism in any religion.
Okay.
And in this case, in Islam, I think we've got a you know, al-Qaeda is very selective. You must have run across the question of martyrdom, for instance. In the Quran, the Prophet says, "Do not kill yourselves."
Well, he says, "Don't destroy yourself." But I'd like to go back to the religious issue.
Okay, go ahead.
Okay. The thing about the religious issue and, you know, Christianity and Judaism, of course. Now let's look at. I would argue the New Testament, Christianity proper, doesn't advocate any kind of violence. Just the New Testament in and of itself. Turn the other cheek, pray for those who persecute you. Christianity, in that sense, is very metaphysical and passive.
You could say then that the New Testament supersedes the Old Testament.
Right.
Yes.
Now, the Old Testament is a good case in point. You can read about, for example, Joshua entering the land of Canaan, being commanded by God to kill every man, woman, child, and all the cattle and every walking thing that lives. Right. Pretty violent stuff. And you would think, ostensibly, how's that different from what's in the Quran? It is different, and the way it's different is because if you look in the Old Testament, and there is a lot of violence, let's just look at that one, the genocide issue with Joshua. In the Bible, when you read it, God commands Joshua to go and kill the Jebusites, the Hebusites, the Canaanites, and he says, until you get that piece of land. So it was, when you really read it, it's more of a historical thing. It's not an open-ended commandment to all the Jews or Hebrews and then subsequently the Jews. It didn't say kill the Gentiles until you take over the world or something like that. It was rooted in a specific time and place and directed at a specific people. Now we can judge that any way we want, you know, say that's unethical of God and this and that, but it never became codified into Hebrew law. It never became some sort of worldview where now Hebrews go and kill Gentiles left and right. Now, whether Jews do that is, again, maybe they do, but it's not part of their law. On the other hand, in Islam, those verses, 929, for example, and verse 9:5, which is a very famous verse, is called the sword verse. So that one also runs as follows: slay the idolaters wherever you find them. Kill them, besiege them, until, basically, they submit to Islam. Now, the early jurists of Islam, they realized that, okay, we have these violent verses, but we also have pretty tolerant verses. Muhammad said, you have your religion, I have mine. Right? He said there's no coercion in religion.
Exactly.
Okay? So now how the jurists needed to derive laws, because Islam, a big component of it is living under the law, the Sharia, and it's derived from the Quran and the Sunnah. So how can they derive laws when you have two contradictory commandments? So they came up with the doctrine of abrogation, which not many people know of. And the doctrine of abrogation basically says, yes, everything that's in the Quran is divine, and it was a revelation from God to Muhammad. But when there's a contradiction, the last word on the issue supersedes all the rest. And then the rest can apply if the believer finds himself in that circumstance, once again, like Muhammad did. So it just so happens that all the violent verses happen to be the last ones that were spoken.
Well, that happens to trace Muhammad's life.
From Mecca to Medina.
Yes,
exactly.
The experiences he was having. Well, then what role do the hadith, the sayings of Muhammad, play in establishing these kinds of laws?
Well, they supplement the Quran. For example, if the Quran, a lot of the stuff in the Quran is not is very ambiguous. I'm sure you know the Quran isn't a very clear-cut document. It's very flowery and poetic. Yeah. So the hadith oftentimes supplements it by actually clarifying. For example, in the Quran it does not say pray 5 times. That was fixed from the hadith.
Right.
It was fixed from the sunnah of Muhammad, his habits and his practices. But generally, the hadith now is much more comprehensive than the Quran. There are 6 canonical hadith collections, and these sometimes address so many other aspects that the Quran never talks about. And if the Quran doesn't talk about it and it's in one of the more authentic hadiths, then that becomes codified into Sharia law.
I had talked to an FBI agent who had done a lot of interrogation, and he said that the Quran is really rarely cited by al-Qaeda members that he's interrogated as hadith, and sometimes very selective hadith that they use to justify their actions. And if you, I know in Yemen and even in Egypt right now that there are theological arguments going on between the state, represented by imams, and these Qaedists, and trying to justify their actions through the Quran, which is very difficult to do.
Well, actually, and this is an important one, suicide bombing. We were talking about that, going back to that point you were making about, killing yourselves, and the Quran says, don't kill yourself.
Yeah.
That one verse, what it literally says, it doesn't use the word kill, it says, don't destroy yourself. And some of the exegetes throughout Islamic history have interpreted that as to not mean kill yourself physically, but don't destroy yourself by giving up jihad in order to make money for yourself. And there's good grounding for that. Okay, now, it's up to the Muslim to decide which interpretation they think is fit.
But bin Laden, he likes to cite that, but the hadith, the Prophet Muhammad said that the specific punishment for a suicide would be spend all of eternity in the act of killing himself with the same instrument he used to die. And when his favorite warrior was injured in battle and in great pain and put himself out of his misery, Muhammad said he will be in hell.
Right. Now, now that's a good point. Now, in Sharia law, we were talking about the Quran and the Hadith and the Sunnah, and that's where the scholars derive the laws. Now, another one, a third of the 4 sources of doing this is called in Arabic qiyas, which means analogy. So if there's something in the Quran that doesn't, or there's some issue that's not addressed in the Quran, but there's something, a precedent or something similar to it, then you can use that. So for example, wine is forbidden in the Quran. Does that mean I can't drink whiskey? So through analogy, they've determined that since wine is, so is that. Now, in this one document that Zawahiri directs or addresses about martyrdom and suicide operations, he uses this method, which, like I said, it's a legitimate method in Islamic jurisprudence. And he basically shows through the hadith numerous mujahideen, Muslim fighters in the time of Muhammad, who knowingly hurl themselves literally, sometimes in catapults, against the enemy, knowing full well that they will die, and they die. And then, for example, there's another one where a man says, and he's talking to Muhammad, he says, and there's enemies there, he says, what happens if I go fight and die? Muhammad says, you will be in paradise. The man takes his sword, breaks it in half, goes, starts swinging till he dies. Okay, so now through that, Zawahiri uses analogy and says, so the point isn't if you physically kill yourself or if you don't kill yourself. The point is, are you killing yourself to benefit the religion, jihad in the path of Allah, or are you killing yourself out of despair and depression, which would be suicide and which would be forbidden?
I often think that we should, we'll take a little break here and then we'll get back to this subject.
Sure.